Welcome, friends! I am Rob, the Dungeon Tutor, and today I'm going to talk about a little slice of gaming experience. For most people, this isn't the common experience in role-playing games, but if you get a taste for it, you might find the opportunity presents itself more often than you might otherwise think. What I'm talking about today is convention games and gaming. Now, if you have a gaming convention in your area that you know of, you're in luck. You have something to look forward to. They're usually held annually, and they can draw in gamers from all over the place. You can meet all kinds of new people and other people who are interested in the same hobby as you. In terms of gamers, we have obvious tentpole conventions that you can go to and experience. Probably the best known of these are going to be Gen Con in Indianapolis, Indiana, Origins in Columbus, Ohio, Dragon Con in Atlanta, Georgia. Those are going to be some of the best known. I know that different fandoms have their own conventions. There's BlizzCon, which I think is in Las Vegas every year. But, those can be, depending on where you live, far away and pricey. Odds are really good, because gaming is fairly widespread, that there's probably a gaming convention in the area near you. A little bit of probing, maybe asking around, or just Googling gaming conventions in my state can help you to find them. I know also overseas there are a number of really big ones, but I don't travel that much, so you'll have to, if you are from someplace other than the United States, you'll have to do a little research for your own. But gaming is such a popular pastime, and it has been even before role-playing games. There were wargaming conventions, there are chess tournaments, there are all kinds of reasons for people who love games to get together. Now, why this is different from other games really has a lot to do with the fact that they are once-in-a-year scenarios that bring a lot of strangers together, and a lot of these strangers want to play games together. So, in terms of role-playing games, convention games are going to be different than what you may be experiencing at your table because, number one, you're going to be playing with different people. If you're used to a consistent gaming group, you already know the players that you're looking across from. You don't really have that at a gaming convention. You have no idea who's going to show up at your table. They could have very different lifestyles, racial and ethnic backgrounds, a veritable smorgasbord. And these days, with all the liberty people have, different lifestyle choices and so on, it's a pretty good bet that at least one of the people that you're looking at is going to have a very different life experience than you do. But you're there and unified by a love of gaming. And they're hoping that you're going to give them a good time, or you're hoping they're going to give you a good time as far as the game goes, if you're there to play, if you're there to run games. Another thing that's different is oftentimes at the gaming table, you're going to be playing a series of games in what might be a campaign or a story arc. You rarely have that luxury in a convention. Oftentimes, the games are going to be one-shots, which, for a set period of time, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours, what have you, you're going to be there trying to get from the beginning of the adventure to the end of the adventure, hopefully to a successful conclusion, telling some thrilling stories and experiencing them with a group of other people. Maybe you know some of these people, maybe you don't. Maybe it's an opportunity to get some new friends. But it is an opportunity, and I can tell you straight off that while maybe these often don't get as deep as a relationship with the players that you already know, the ones that show up to your table all the time, you can still tell some fascinating stories. And honestly, if you play with only the same people over and over again, there are opportunities to surprise you may get relatively few as you know them better and better. This is an opportunity to really take advantage of the diversity of the gaming community and meet some new people experiencing games in a different way. Now, You may also have surmised that maybe this isn't the best thing for everybody, and that is true. With the exposing yourself to other people's experiences, some people may have experiences that you don't particularly care for. And oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, people will be sensitive to what their players are experiencing and want genuinely for them to have a good time. Yeah, you hear sometimes about game masters who like to shock their players and have a reputation for, being brutal or disingenuous or what have you. But when I'm running a game, I want the players to have a good time, especially if they paid to play at my game. I consider that a badge of honor. Yeah, I'm not seeing it. It's going to the con, who is oftentimes going to be reimbursing me in some way if I'm running games for them, which is absolutely their due. And if you're lucky enough to have a convention like the one I just went to, Gamehole Con, that money goes to charity, and that's cool in its own way. So, in a way you feel like you're raising money for charity, it's awesome. But they still paid money to come and sit at your table, so you owe them a good experience, as much as you can. There's a couple of ways of getting to that. First of all, and I'm just going to give my basic rules of decency in gaming for strangers. Number one, I can't stress this one enough. Be completely honest. If you're going to be running a game of erotic fantasy, don't label it as a fun, lighthearted romp through a familiar fantasy setting. No, don't do that. That's terrible. And especially for that, don't list it as open to anybody of any age. You're a particularly bad person if you do that. That's just, you're asking for it. Likewise, if it's going to be dark, scary, edgy, those are things that really should be in the title. You might be able to assume it with some games. If I'm playing Morkborg, for instance, I'm not expecting something in an experience I would have from My Little Pony Tales of Equestria. Some things are built in, but even so, it's still fair and prudent to announce what kind of a game you're going to run. And if you don't announce anything, then you should generally try to tailor your things to the widest possible demographic. In my case, it would be my games run appropriate for children. A child could come up to my game with their ticket and say, I want to play your game. If I didn't specify that I need you to be a bit older, cool. I can run games for kids. Why? Well, number one, I know how to refrain from using language that isn't suitable for kids. I know how it is inappropriate for certain content to come up with children. And I know that there are some things that just generally could offend people, so I like to generally leave that stuff out. If I advertise that I'm running a game in the Forgotten Realms, Tutor, then I feel that it's fine if I bring up the odd god like Mystra or Cyric or, that's fine. But if I don't, if it's a generic world of my own fantasy, I generally might not bring up gods in general. Just because some people might feel a little unsettled with, where they find themselves in their religious understanding and being uncomfortable talking about different gods. It's a relatively minor point, and a lot of people wouldn't have a problem with it, but it's just something I'm sensitive about. So I can tackle it in the way that a lot of fantasy writers have. There's the light, and there's the darkness. And that's really relatively easy concepts that doesn't deify anything and still gives you a reason to have clerics with powers and such. Likewise, no adult situations. No sex, no graphic violence. That's not appropriate for the players that I've got. If everybody's an adult, then I can maybe get into a scene of violence a little bit more. I can talk about the odd critical blow that severs something or rips something open or something like that. See how I'm even for this video I tone it down because that's how my content goes. But if you are open for a general audience, you refrain from talking about excessive scenes of gore or including adult content. It just makes sense for your audience, and honestly, I honestly believe that it actually sets you a notch above. A lot of people have a hard time taking seriously on an intellectual level people who compulsively curse. It just makes you seem a little bit more lowbrow and coarse and common, which is why I don't do it. If I'm swearing, you know I'm in pain or I'm really angry, but I don't, because I don't think that it necessarily shows me off in my best light. And people who can't refrain themselves will find it may be difficult to choke that down if they're actually playing in a game that's not appropriate for. So things will slip out, for instance, which is unfortunate. Another thing that's important when you are at a con, besides just controlling yourself, is controlling your game. Now, there's a few things that if you're running a game, your experience should be a little bit different from playing. So I'm going to talk about being a player first. If you're going to play at a con, you do have responsibilities. You're not just there to be entertained. You have responsibilities. Your first responsibility is to the other players. And that is, don't do things that make them feel uncomfortable. That's basic human decency. I am sad to say that I have to say this, but quite honestly, I've seen too many examples of people not doing that. So, number 2 is to obey the conventions of the game. Don't steal from the other party members. Don't attack other party members unless you're specifically playing in a game for player versus player. Look for reasons to work with other people, not for the reasons why you would never trust somebody. It's just only self-stimulating if you're breaking party unity just because you feel like you must. No, look for reasons to work with every other person. And I mean, it's for the sake of the group, look for ways to make everybody else better. You only have maybe this one shot with some of these people. Look for ways to prop everybody up rather than just make yourself look good. This is difficult and against some people's playstyle, but really in a convention or something like that, it makes you look so much better. They'll remember you're the person who helped them to get to that point. Much more so than they'll remember, oh wow, he's the guy who killed all the monsters and did all the stuff while we just kind of watched. No, don't be that guy or that gal. You want to try to work with other people. It's pretty basic level in Fun 101 if everybody gets a chance to do stuff and you celebrate other people's victories. Don't ever try to jinx other people's dice. Don't look at somebody's dice roll and go 1, 1, 1 in a game where 1 is disastrous. Don't do that. That's awful. Celebrate other people's victories, and especially for people who are new to the game, be an ambassador. Be the person that they remember as a cool person to play with. I can't remember all of the people that I didn't like that I ended up playing with. But I can tell you a lot of the examples of people that I really cherished the experience we had, even if it was fleeting. Be that person. Be the person they remember fondly. Don't be the bad example. So, another thing that kind of behooves you is to know the game that you signed up for. So, if you sign up for a horror game, it's probably not cool to say, scary situations scare me, so can we tone the horror down? In a horror game that other people go expecting horror, that's a situation that you probably shouldn't have signed up for that game. Expecting everybody else to lower the thrill of that game, thinking that it's the horror that was advertised, probably not quite so cool. I'm not saying that a person who's somewhat squeamish can't enjoy horror too, and if you want to try something like that, I would recommend contacting the Game Master first and saying, hey, if you're going to do horror, can we do horror that isn't focused around this thing that really sets me off? Maybe they can do that for you, but other than that, know what you're getting into. Another thing is, in general, try to be familiar with the rules. Now, if they say newcomers welcome, then you expect that the Game Master is going to be able to help you out through the rules and just allow you to enjoy the game and try to learn as you go. Odds are there will be some central mechanic to the game that you'll be using again and again and again. Learn that. Even if you don't know all the little idiosyncrasies, even if you don't know all the little things to the game, at least know the big central thing of the game, and or when it comes up, learn that, pay attention. And pay attention to what's going on around you. Don't make the game master repeat himself. You only have so much time. Try to be a part of things when your turn is there. And in the occasions, every once in a while, somebody else is getting the focus. Try not to go and get distracted so that they have to tell you what happened. Try to focus and try to stay there in the moment as much as you can. So that's my advice for being a player. Everything else that comes with being a player also applies to a con, but in a lesser extent, many of them, because, well, again, the circumstances may dictate. If it's newcomers welcome, I generally have all kinds of dice on me, but a newcomer I would expect might come up and not have any dice. If I'm advertising a game, newcomers welcome, I got scramble bags of dice I'll throw over to them. Here, use these. You'll have your own set of dice with your own color that you can roll for yourself when we play this game. And people think that's cool. And yeah, it is a little cool, because I'm going to that extra effort to make sure that that newcomer feels welcome in my game. If you're doing things like that, you're on the right path. Now, game masters, cons are a little bit different. The preparation for cons is a little bit more important. You only got one shot at this first impression. So, if you don't know the adventure, bad luck. Really bad luck. If you're sitting there reading the adventure so you know what comes next, not a good look. So, preparation is important. You should be familiar with the adventure. You should be familiar with the encounters and why things are set up the way they are. I would say even to some extent a little bit greater level of absorption than you might have at your day-to-day gaming table. Just because, again, you're not going to necessarily be able to game plan around what the players are going to do. You've got a lot of unknown quantities, possibly. So you can't just wing it the same way that you might with your home group, that you know their reactions, you know their tendencies. Con groups can really surprise you with just a twist they can throw onto things. So also, likewise, I would recommend not straying from the script overly much when you're doing a con game. Normally, if you can improvise like crazy, good on you, have fun. But if you're running a game and you only have a set amount of time to tell your story and to let the players have fun in that story, unless the players really make it clear they're not interested in the basic story, and if that's the case, why did they sign up for your game? Unless your clarifications weren't very good, and at that time you should work on your description of your game for the event post. But, more to the point, you really kind of have to maintain a little bit more of a tyranny of your position as a game master for con games. If you have an adventure in mind, like, say, for instance, I tell people that I'm going to run Ravenloft, I6, Ravenloft, and the people there will not go into the big bad evil guy's castle. They will refuse. They fight, kicking and screaming the whole way. You have my permission to have them all swept unconscious, and then when they wake up, they're inside the courtyard of the castle and the drawbridge is up and they can't get out. Fine, do that, because if one person is ruining it for everybody, that's frustrating. Maybe the group will mediate that, but if the group as a whole is fighting your story the whole way, do what you have to do. If you want to become the most railroady game master that ever existed, you have a story to tell. You advertise that you are going to involve this element of your story, and if the players decide they're not having it, sometimes you gotta be a little harsh to do that. Now, if you're comfortable with winging it, and you think you could tell just as exciting of a story as the one you promised, or maybe what you promised was your own creation anyhow, and they won't know any better, so be it. A certain trick called Schrodinger's Ogre comes to mind. If you have an ogre encounter that's really cool, and you have a path, one to the left and one to the right, the ogre's on the one to the left, the party chooses to go to the right, and they encounter the ogre. But they didn't choose the way to the left. They went to the right. The answer is it doesn't really matter. They don't need to be the wiser. You had this really cool encounter that you wanted, but then why did you let them make a choice in the first place, you might say? You're right, it is not the greatest game design. If you have a linear story, then making false paths that don't matter, just kind of more of a jerk move, in a way. So I can totally see that, but if you're doing your job right, the players will never know. But more to the point, if you're running a con game and you've got a bunch of people you don't know, you owe them your best. You owe them, if they've paid to belly up to your table, you owe them a good time. And that involves giving of yourself. Now, in my experience of theater, when you're on stage, you're pouring out your energy into the role. The audience receives that energy. They feel it, and oftentimes, if you've got a good crowd, they give you energy back. They react, they laugh, they clap, they ooh and ah. That gives you feedback. That gives you energy back into you. And if you're a skilled actor, you can drain yourself completely and renew yourself on the stage as you do your role. It's an amazing feeling, and yeah, it's really cool. Gaming is a lot like that, though. In gaming, you can pour your energy out. Obviously, you might have to save some. The con may be long, but you should be giving of yourself. And if you're doing a good job and your players are good, they'll give you some energy back. They'll be excited about how they're responding. They'll narrate their actions appropriately and how they want to do things and give you a lot to role play with. So you have to do less work, even if you're pumping more energy and being more excited about what's going on. That's a hallmark of a game master. They're going to remember and treasure the experience. Another thing that I think I generally recommend at cons, this isn't a rule, this isn't something you have to do. Try to do something other people aren't doing. If everybody's running 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, look into the back catalog of whatever you've got on the shelf and see if there's something nobody's running. Hey, nobody's running Shadowrun. I'll run a Shadowrun game. And you've got a pretty good chance that there's going to be a number of people who are like, God, everything is Dungeons & Dragons. Shadowrun! Ooh! That could be cool. I've done this before, and generally I find I get quite a few takers when I do these oddball games in the middle of a convention where everybody seems to be playing one particular game, or just a few particular games. Go with something outside of the experience and have some fun with it. Even if you have to make up the adventure yourself. If you're playing a game that, like I just picked up, Men in Black, the role-playing game. Okay. If I want to make up a story involving Men in Black, and that's what I'm billing my event by, I think I got a pretty good chance of getting a good-sized table of people who love the Men in Black movie and don't feel like playing the common game that everyone is playing these days. That's a viable strategy and allows you to really flex what you're doing. You may have to have newcomers welcome, because, let's face it, not a lot of people have or are playing Men in Black, the role-playing game, so you're going to have to be a little bit more flexible and allow newcomers to come into your group not knowing the rules. That's another tip, too, but we'll get into that. But, yeah, you've got to be flexible, and the more exotic the game, the more you want to welcome newcomers in. It really works if it's a game that you're passionate about and you want to spread the love. Now, in a con game, more than any other game, I recommend being the cook that cuts the crusts off the sandwich for the customer. Okay? That means a couple of things. Number one, pre-generated characters rock. If you waste an hour of your game time in character prep, you failed as far as I'm concerned. You admitted that you already had a very short adventure that wasn't going to fill that time block. Don't do that. Just go with pre-generated characters. The players are there just to play something. If you give them their characters, they're not going to think any worse of it. The one exception to that was one time I invited everybody to bring their personal character. That was quite interesting because I saw how broken some campaigns can get. Very informative. But Generally, pre-generated characters are best. Number 2, have an idea of how the rules work and what do you need and not need from the rules. Absolutely useful. 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, for example. All you need is the core mechanic. Roll a 20-sided die, add a number, give me your total. That's all you need anybody to understand. After that, then you can show them where the numbers are, but it's the same mechanic. Make a saving throw. That's where the number is that you added, but otherwise it's just the same thing, roll a 20-sided die. If you get really good as a game master, you might even just cut out the math altogether. Roll the die, tell me what you get. I'll tell you if you succeed or not. There's no barrier to rules that way. Can be pretty handy. If you're playing and you have spellcasters, maybe get rid of spell components, even if you use them at your table. Just not necessary. Doesn't really add to the game. I could do without that. Tracking ammunition. Unless you're playing a dungeon crawl where resource management is important, you know what? You shoot your arrows. I'm assuming you had enough arrows for the job. We're good. You could be fine. And all kinds of little irritations like that. Little measly things in the game, unless they're not that measly, you could probably dispense with, and the players are still going to have a fantastic time, because after all, they're there for your story, not keeping track of arrows. The last thing I would recommend for game masters, and this is, kind of an important one, is, along with all the other basic rules of decency, be considerate to those around you. Don't blast loud music and insist you need loud music for your game if there's other people in the same gaming space. I got by at the convention with this little speaker turned quiet that was just streaming tabletop audio background music for my games, and it worked fine. Nobody complained, nobody batted an eye. They heard the sounds, but it really didn't jar with what they were doing. It went well. I didn't push the limit by cranking it up as loud as I could because I wanted to hear what my players had to say mostly, but also because I didn't want to rock the boat. On the other hand, sometimes it's okay to let other people see what a good time your table is having. And that's the point where I sometimes get a little excited and a little overdramatic when I'm describing something or when I'm running my game and an NPC is acting. I will say what the NPC does in the tone the NPC says it, and I don't care if everybody looks at me from across the room when I do it. I don't do it constantly, though. If, for instance, the party finds a woman who has bereft because her child has been kidnapped, and that might be the crux of the story, then that's the time to go, "Whoa, my baby, loudly, for just a little bit. Don't make a jerk of yourself, but the players will react stronger, and you'll have a bunch of people who'll be going, that game sounds interesting. Okay, cool. You've ambassadored for the game, and you've entertained your players. You're doing things right. Now, another thing that oftentimes in these games, we like to show off. We like to show what we have. So if you've got like 3D dungeoning stuff and miniatures and things like that to make it look cool, to increase the eye appeal, not only to your players, but all those people who are going to be walking by your table, cons are a great time to do that because, again, there's few better opportunities to really show off what you've got and what you know. At the very least, if you got a set screen that you want to use with nice art on it, good time for that. If you've got props that you want to use, it's a good time for that. If you're dressed up in a really cool costume as the game master, it's a good time for that. So, cons, it can be amazing. And those opportunities for everybody who's participating in them. Those are just some of the basics, the tenets that I live and game by when I go to cons. Hopefully you get a chance to go to cons yourself if you haven't, and if you do, you probably have a good idea of how awesome they can be. Just steer clear of some of the pitfalls, the things I recommended against, and you should have a pretty good time gaming. But again, as we found out in the year 2020, these things can't always be taken for granted. They can be taken away by circumstances outside of our control. So if you get a chance, go to a con, meet the VIPs, tip your artists. They can use the money. Buy some cool art. Always something I recommend. Go talk to the indie guys, not just the big tentpole displays, but go look out for the small guys who might have something really cool. And always go on the last day when people are looking to get out and not have to ship a bunch of stuff, so they'll cut their prices. Good time to make some wise investments. Don't overload yourself and drag stuff throughout the hall. You're just going to wear your arms out. And have fun. Conventions are there to have fun. And if you keep your wits about you, don't overspend, budget yourself, control yourself at the VIPs so you don't get walked out by security, you can enjoy convention gaming too. Just be aware of the differences and you'll be just fine. So that's my advice as the Dungeon Tutor. If you enjoyed this, feel free to like, subscribe, what have you. But more importantly, if you have experiences of your own or something I've missed, feel free to leave that in the comments and we can have a discussion on that. Or it might engender another video for me. But I just hope this helps and keeps you enjoying yourself the next time you get to go to a convention. But until that time, I'm Rob the Dungeon Tutor. I want to thank you for joining me. And until the next session, farewell.